I was hauling a load of gravel in my dump truck when I first saw her standing at the end of my driveway, arms crossed like she owned the place. The woman had that look, the one every contractor in America learns to recognize from 100 yards away. The HOA president's stance, complete with clipboard, pursed lips, and an expression that suggested my very existence was a personal insult. I pulled the truck to a stop, dust settling around us in the late afternoon Montana sun, and rolled down my window. "Can I help you?" I asked, already knowing this conversation wasn't going to be pleasant. "Are you Jake Morrison?" she demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "That would be me." "I'm Patricia Whitmore, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association." She said it like she was announcing royalty. "We need to discuss your vehicles." I glanced back at my dump truck, then over at my property where my flatbed and my excavator sat. "What about them?" "They're commercial vehicles, Mr. Morrison. The HOA covenant clearly states that no commercial vehicles are permitted on neighborhood streets or in view from the road." I felt my jaw tighten. "Madam, I don't live in your HOA. My property predates your development by about 40 years. This was my grandfather's land." Patricia's face flushed red. "That may be, but you're using our roads and our covenants apply to anyone utilizing association property." "Your roads?" I leaned out the window. "Lady, this is County Road 47. It's a public road. The section running through Meadowbrook Estates is maintained by the HOA, which makes it subject to our rules." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that getting into a shouting match wouldn't help anything. I've been running my construction business from this property for 5 years now. Never had a problem before. "Well, you have a problem now. I'm giving you formal notice that as of Monday, commercial vehicles will not be permitted to use the roads through Meadowbrook Estates. You'll need to find another route." She thrust a piece of paper through my window, turned on her heel, and marched back to her pristine white Lexus. I sat there for a moment, staring at the notice in my hand. It was printed on official-looking letterhead, complete with legal language about covenant enforcement and violation penalties. The thing was, Patricia had made one massive miscalculation, and I was pretty sure she had no idea what she'd just started. See, my property sat on 15 acres at the end of what used to be a dead-end road. When the developers bought up the surrounding land 10 years ago to build Meadowbrook Estates, they needed access to the main highway. The problem was, there was only one practical route, and it required crossing a corner of my property. My grandfather, being a reasonable man, had granted them an easement. But that easement came with very specific terms, all properly recorded with the county. I drove up to my house, parked the dump truck next to the barn, and headed inside. My dog, a German shepherd named Diesel, greeted me at the door with his usual enthusiasm. I scratched his ears and went straight to my office, pulling out the metal file box where I kept all the property documents. The easement agreement was right where I'd left it, in a manila folder labeled Property Legal. I spread it out on my desk and read through it again, even though I knew exactly what it said. My grandfather had granted Meadowbrook Estates Development Company an easement for ingress and egress across the southwestern corner of his property, approximately 60 feet wide and 200 feet long. The easement was contingent on the road being used for residential purposes only, and included a clause stating that the grantor and his heirs retained the right to use any roads within the development for access to the main highway. More importantly, there was a termination clause. If the development or its successors attempted to restrict the grantor's or his heirs' reasonable use of their property, the easement could be terminated with 30 days written notice. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. Patricia Whitmore had just threatened to restrict my reasonable use of my property. In fact, she'd threatened to ban my work vehicles from using the very roads that only existed because my grandfather had been generous enough to grant them access. The thing was, Meadowbrook Estates had been built in a peculiar geographical situation. The development sat in a shallow valley between two ridges. The original access road, the one that led to my property, came in from the east. But the developers had wanted a more impressive entrance from the west, where it connected to Highway 93, the main route to Kalispell. To make that connection, they had to cross my property. Without that easement, the only way in or out of Meadowbrook Estates was past my house, down a road that was barely wide enough for two cars to pass. Definitely not suitable for the kind of upscale image they wanted to project. I spent the rest of Friday evening going through all my documents, making copies of everything, and drafting a response. I wasn't a lawyer, but I dealt with enough contracts and property issues in my construction business to know how to write a formal letter. Saturday morning, I drove into Kalispell to see my attorney, Tom Bradford. Tom had handled the probate when my grandfather passed and had helped me set up my LLC. His office was in a converted house on Main Street, and he was usually there on Saturday mornings catching up on paperwork. "Jake." He greeted me warmly. "What brings you in?" I handed him Patricia's notice and the easement agreement. "Got a situation with the HOA." Tom read through both documents, his expression shifting from casual interest to barely suppressed amusement. "Oh, this is good. This is really good." I was thinking of sending them a letter explaining the situation, maybe pointing out that their threat constitutes grounds for terminating the easement. "We could do that," Tom agreed, leaning back in his chair. "Or we could let them make the first move. See if they're really stupid enough to follow through. You think they will, HOAs like this. They get drunk on power. Patricia Whitmore probably has no idea about the easement situation, and even if someone tries to tell her, she'll be too prideful to back down immediately. Let them ban your trucks, document everything. Then we hit them with the termination notice. That seems a bit risky. What if they try to tow my vehicles or something? They won't. County Road 47 is public until it crosses into the development. They have no authority to do anything on the public section, and if they try to block you from using the private section, well, that just strengthens our position. Tom grinned. "Trust me on this. Sometimes the best legal strategy is letting the other side hang themselves." I left Tom's office feeling better about the situation, though still annoyed at the whole mess. I'd never wanted problems with the HOA. I minded my own business, kept my property neat, and never caused any trouble. But if Patricia wanted to play hardball, I was more than prepared to show her exactly how bad an idea that was. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystal-clear sky that makes you remember why you live in Montana. I had a job over in Columbia Falls, replacing a failed septic system for a client who'd called in a panic Friday afternoon. I loaded up my excavator on the flatbed, hooked it to my pickup, and headed out around 7 in the morning. The route to my property was simple. County Road 47 ran east to west, passing through Meadowbrook Estates before reaching my land. To get to the highway, I had to drive through the development. There wasn't another practical option unless I wanted to add an hour to my commute by going around through back roads. As I approached the entrance to Meadowbrook Estates, I saw them. 2 vehicles were parked across the road, blocking both lanes. Patricia Whitmore stood between them with 3 other people, all wearing bright yellow safety vests like they were traffic controllers. I stopped my truck about 20 feet back and climbed out. "You want to move your vehicles, Mr. Morrison. You were given notice. Commercial vehicles are not permitted on HOA roads. Patricia held up a laminated sign that read, "No commercial vehicles HOA enforcement." "That's a public county road," I said, keeping my voice level. "The portion running through Meadowbrook Estates is private property, maintained and controlled by the HOA. And you're telling me I can't use it to access my property? You can use your personal vehicles, but not commercial trucks." She pointed at my flatbed with the excavator. "That is clearly a commercial vehicle." One of the men with her, a guy in his 50s with a red face and a prominent gut, stepped forward. "You need to turn around, buddy. Rules are rules." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "For the record, I'm being denied access to the public road that provides the primary route to my property." "Is that correct?" "We're enforcing HOA covenants," Patricia said, her voice tight. "If you don't comply, we'll have your vehicle towed." "On what authority? You're not law enforcement." "We have a contract with Mountain Valley Towing. They'll be here in 10 minutes if you don't leave." I looked at the four of them, then back at my truck. I could probably just drive around them, but that would likely lead to all sorts of drama, possibly even criminal charges if they wanted to push it. Better to document this and do it right. "Okay," I said. "I'm leaving. But understand that you're interfering with my ability to conduct business and access my property. I'll be following up on this." I got back in my truck, turned around, and took the long route to Columbia Falls. What normally would have been a 40-minute drive took an hour and a half on rough back roads. I called my client on the way to let him know I'd be late, then called Tom Bradford. "They actually blocked the road." Tom sounded delighted. "Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Get me any video or photos you have. Document every time they block you, every extra mile you have to drive, every bit of additional expense this causes. We're building a case here." The septic job took most of the day. It was straightforward work, but messy and time-consuming. By the time I finished, it was nearly 6 in the evening. I headed back, this time approaching Meadowbrook Estates from the east, through the main entrance from Highway 93. This entrance was the fancy one, with stone pillars and a decorative metal arch reading Meadowbrook Estates in flowing script. The road here was wide and smooth, lined with expensive homes on large lots. It wound through the development for about a mile before reaching the eastern section where it connected to County Road 47. As I drove through, I saw people stopping to stare at my flatbed. One man actually stepped into his driveway and took pictures. I waved at him. This was going to get worse before it got better. I could feel it. When I got home, I found a notice taped to my mailbox. It was from the HOA, informing me that my use of private HOA roads with commercial vehicles was a violation of community standards, and that I was subject to fines of $500 per incident. I called Tom again. "They're fining you for using the western entrance." Tom laughed. "Jake, they're giving us everything we need. Don't pay the fine. Let them rack up violations. We're going to have one hell of a response for them. How long are we waiting? Let's give it a week. Let them really commit to this. Then we drop the hammer." It was a long week. Every morning, Patricia and her crew were at the eastern blockade, preventing me from using what I still considered a public road. Every evening, I had to drive through the development from the west, and every evening I found a new violation notice on my mailbox. By Friday, they were claiming I owed them $3,500 in fines, but I documented everything. Photos, videos, timestamps. I tracked every extra mile I drove, every minute of additional drive time, every inconvenience. Tom had me keep a detailed log, and I was religious about it. The job in Columbia Falls wrapped up Thursday, but I had a new project starting Monday in Whitefish. That would mean driving through the development twice a day with heavy equipment. I mentioned this to Tom Friday afternoon. Perfect timing, he said. Let's send the letter today. Give them their 30 days notice that you're terminating the easement. Tom had drafted the letter earlier in the week. It was beautiful in its simplicity and devastating in its implications. It referenced the original easement agreement, cited the specific clause regarding restrictions on reasonable use, detailed every instance of the HOA blocking my access or fining me for using their roads, and provided clear notice that the easement would terminate in 30 days. The letter also helpfully explained what terminating the easement meant. Meadowbrook Estates would lose legal access across my property, cutting off their western entrance from Highway 93. All traffic would have to use the eastern route on County Road 47, past my house. We sent it via certified mail and email to Patricia Whitmore, the HOA board and the development's management company. Saturday morning, my phone started ringing at 8. I didn't recognize the number, so I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. By 9 o'clock, I had 12 missed calls and 7 voicemail messages. The messages ranged from confused to angry to panicked. Patricia's message was pure fury. Mr. Morrison, you cannot terminate that easement. We have legal access rights. This is extortion, and I will be contacting the police and our attorneys immediately. Another board member, a man named Gerald something, left a more measured message. Mr. Morrison, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Could we please meet to discuss this situation? I'm sure we can find a reasonable solution. The management company's representative sounded exhausted. Mr. Morrison, this is David Chen from Prestige Property Management. We handle the administrative duties for Meadowbrook Estates. I've just been made aware of the situation, and I'd really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Please call me back. I called Tom first. The hornet's nest is officially kicked. I saw. Patricia already emailed me, threatening to sue you, me, and apparently my ancestors back 3 generations. The management company reached out too, much more professionally. What do you want to do? What are my options? Legally, you're in the clear. The easement agreement gives you the explicit right to terminate under these circumstances. They can't force you to maintain it. However, shutting down their main access road is going to affect a lot of people who had nothing to do with Patricia's power trip. I'd been thinking about that. There were about 80 homes in Meadowbrook Estates. Most of the residents had been perfectly nice on the few occasions I'd interacted with them. This wasn't their fault. What if we offered to negotiate? I suggested. Not backing down, but showing we're willing to work something out. We could do that, but we negotiate from strength. The easement termination stands unless we reach an agreement that protects your interests. Set up a meeting, but not at my house, somewhere neutral. Tom arranged a meeting for Monday afternoon at his office. I spent the weekend ignoring phone calls and watching as traffic through the development seemed to pick up. Apparently word was spreading, and people were driving through to see what all the fuss was about. Sunday evening, I got a knock on my door. I opened it to find a woman in her 60s, gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing gardening clothes. Mr. Morrison, I'm Helen Cartwright. I live over on Aspen Lane. She gestured vaguely westward. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all. What can I do for you? I wanted to apologize. I'm on the HOA board, and I had no idea Patricia was blocking your access until Friday evening. Some of us didn't know about any of this until your letter arrived. She looked genuinely distressed. I think Patricia's been operating without proper board approval for most of this. That was interesting. Come on in, Mrs. Cartwright. Can I get you some coffee or water? We sat at my kitchen table while Helen explained the internal politics of the HOA. Apparently, Patricia had been president for 3 years and had increasingly been making unilateral decisions without consulting the full board. The commercial vehicle ban had been her idea, announced at a meeting where only 2 other board members were present, not enough for a quorum. "Several of us are calling for an emergency board meeting," Helen said. "We want to remove Patricia as president and try to fix this situation, but I wanted you to know that not everyone in Meadowbrook supports what she did." "I appreciate that, Mrs. Cartwright. I never wanted problems with the HOA. I just want to run my business and be left alone." "I understand, and I hope you'll consider that many of us had no part in this. Losing the western entrance would be difficult for everyone." After Helen left, I called Tom and filled him in. "Does this change anything?" "Not legally. But it's good to know there's internal dissent. Might make negotiations easier." Monday morning, I headed to my new job in Whitefish. I took the eastern route, arriving at the blockade around 7:30. Patricia was there with the same crew, looking exhausted and angry. "Move," I said simply. "You don't get to make demands, Mr. Morrison. You're violating HOA covenants, and you're blocking access to my property and interfering with my business. We're meeting at 3 o'clock with attorneys. Until then, I suggest you get out of my way before I call the county sheriff and report that you're blocking a public road." The red-faced man from before stepped forward. "You threatening us?" "Nope. Just stating facts. This section of County Road 47 is public. You're blocking it. That's illegal." I pulled out my phone. "Should I make the call?" Patricia's eye twitched, but she waved at the vehicles. "Let him through." They moved the cars and I drove past, watching them in my mirror. This was escalating and I wasn't sure how much longer it would stay civil. The job in Whitefish was installing a drainage system for a new commercial building. It would take about 2 weeks, good money, and normally I'd be happy about it. But I spent most of the day distracted, thinking about the afternoon meeting. I wrapped up around 2:30 and headed straight to Tom's office, arriving early to go over strategy. Tom had been busy over the weekend, pulling records from the county and digging into the HOA's legal structure. "Here's what I found," he said, spreading documents across his conference table. "First, Patricia absolutely did not have authority to ban your vehicles without a proper board vote. Second, the HOA's own governing documents require a quorum of at least 4 board members for any major policy decisions. Third, and this is the big one, the management company was never informed about any of this until Friday. Patricia's been going rogue. So what's our play? We listen. Let them make offers. But we stand firm on 3 points. No restrictions on your vehicle use, compensation for the past week of interference, and a formal acknowledgement that they overstepped. If they agree to those terms, we can discuss maintaining the easement." At 3 o'clock, Tom's conference room filled up. Patricia arrived with a lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Robert Ashford. David Chen from the management company came alone, and 3 other HOA board members showed up, including Helen Cartwright. Tom started the meeting with a summary of the situation. He laid out the timeline, showed the documentation of the blockades and fines, and explained the legal basis for terminating the easement. Robert Ashford cleared his throat. "Mr. Bradford, we dispute your interpretation of the easement agreement. The termination clause requires unreasonable restriction of use. My client was enforcing legitimate HOA covenants. Covenants that don't apply to my client's property," Tom countered. "And blocking access to a public road is absolutely unreasonable. The road through Meadowbrook Estates is private. County Road 47 is public. Your development sits along it, but you don't own it. And more importantly, even if we accepted your argument about the private sections, You can't restrict use based on vehicle type when that directly interferes with a property owner's livelihood. David Chen held up a hand. Gentlemen, can we focus on solutions rather than arguments? Mr. Morrison, what would it take to maintain the easement? I leaned forward. First, immediate removal of any restrictions on my vehicles. I can use any road, any time, with any legal vehicle I need for my business. Second, all fines are dropped and I'm compensated for the extra expenses I incurred this week. Third, written acknowledgement from the HOA that they overstepped and guarantee this won't happen again. Patricia's face went red. That's absolutely unacceptable. You can't just— Patricia, Helen Cartwright interrupted quietly, you don't speak for the board anymore. Everyone turned to look at Helen. She pulled out a piece of paper and slid it across the table. As of this morning, the board held an emergency meeting. Patricia has been removed as president. I'm interim president until we hold elections next month. Patricia looked like she'd been slapped. You can't do that. I've dedicated 3 years to this community. You've been making decisions without board approval and created a legal nightmare, one of the other board members said, a man I didn't recognize. You're still on the board, Patricia, but you're not president anymore. Robert Ashford looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Whitmore, perhaps I should speak with the current board leadership. Helen turned to me. Mr. Morrison, on behalf of Meadowbrook Estates, I apologize. What Patricia did was wrong and it wasn't authorized by the board. We'd like to accept your terms and resolve this. Just like that. I was surprised at how quickly things were moving. Just like that. We're not interested in a legal battle we can't win, and frankly, you're in the right here. We need that western access and you've been more than patient with us. David Chen nodded. I can draw up a formal agreement by end of business tomorrow. It'll include everything you specified, plus a clause stating that any future HOA actions affecting your property require full board approval and notice to you in advance. Tom looked at me, and I nodded. That works. Patricia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor. This is ridiculous. He's holding the entire community hostage. We should fight this. With what argument? Robert Ashford said quietly. Mrs. Whitmore, I advise you to accept this resolution. But Patricia was beyond reason. No. I will not let some contractor with his trashy trucks ruin our community standards. We have rules for a reason. The rules don't apply to him. Helen's voice was sharp now. His property isn't part of our HOA. It never has been. You tried to extend our authority where it doesn't exist, and now we're paying the price. Then we should buy his property, Patricia snapped. Offer him money to sell and get him out of here. I felt my temper flare. My property is not for sale. Not to you, not to the HOA, not to anyone. My grandfather homesteaded this land in 1952. I grew up here. I'm not going anywhere. Everything has a price, Patricia said coldly. Not this. And you know what? I'm done being polite. You want to know why I have an easement agreement that lets me shut down your fancy entrance? Because my grandfather was kind enough to help out when developers came asking. He could have told them no, forced them to use only the eastern access, but he was a good neighbor. And this is how you repay that kindness. By trying to ban me from public roads. The room was silent. Tom put a hand on my arm, a gentle reminder not to say anything I'd regret. Helen spoke softly. You're absolutely right, Mr. Morrison. We're grateful for your grandfather's generosity, and we're grateful that you're willing to continue the easement arrangement. I promise you, this won't happen again. Patricia grabbed her purse and stormed out, Robert Ashford following with an apologetic nod to the rest of us. The remaining board members and David Chen spent another hour working out details. They agreed to pay me $2,500 for the extra expenses and inconvenience from the past week. All violation notices would be rescinded and removed from any HOA records. And most importantly, they drafted a resolution that would be added to the HOA's governing documents. Any restrictions on road use could not be applied to pre-existing properties outside the HOA without explicit written agreement from those property owners. I left Tom's office feeling lighter than I had in days. The crisis was resolved. I'd stood my ground, and I'd even made some allies in the process. Tuesday morning, I drove through Meadowbrook Estates on my way to Whitefish. No blockades, no Patricia, no drama, just a smooth drive to work. But Tuesday afternoon, things took a turn. I got back to my property around 5:30, tired and ready for a shower and dinner. As I drove up my driveway, I noticed something odd. The gate to my equipment yard was open, and I distinctly remembered closing it that morning. I parked and walked over to the gate, Diesel at my side. He was growling softly, hackles up. Inside the yard, my storage shed door was hanging open, the padlock missing. I called the sheriff's office immediately. Deputy Marcus Reynolds arrived about 20 minutes later. Marcus and I had gone to high school together, and he'd always been a straight shooter. He took one look at the shed and the gate and shook his head. "Looks like someone cut your lock," he said, pointing at the hasp. "You keep anything valuable in there? Tools mostly." "Some equipment manuals, spare parts." I checked inside. "Looks like they went through stuff, but I don't think anything's missing. It's almost like they were searching for something specific." Marcus took photos and notes, then walked around the property looking for other signs of entry. "You have any idea who might do this? Any enemies?" I thought about Patricia, then dismissed it. She was angry and unreasonable, but breaking into my property seemed like a step too far even for her. "Not really. I mean, there's the HOA situation, but that got resolved yesterday. The thing with them trying to block your trucks, I heard about that, seemed pretty stupid on their part." Marcus finished his notes. "I'll file a report, and we'll increase patrols past your place for the next few nights. You might want to consider getting some security cameras." After Marcus left, I spent the evening installing motion sensor lights around the equipment yard and the barn. I'd been meaning to do it anyway, and this seemed like a good push to actually get it done. Diesel stayed close, still uneasy about something. Wednesday morning I was up early, heading to Whitefish by 7. The work was going well, and I was actually ahead of schedule. But around 10 o'clock I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Jake Morrison?" A woman's voice, professional and crisp, speaking. "Mr. Morrison, this is Jennifer Hartley from the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. We've received a complaint about your property and possible violations of environmental regulations." My stomach dropped. "What kind of violations?" "The complaint alleges improper storage of hazardous materials, potential soil contamination from vehicle maintenance, and unpermitted discharge of wastewater. We need to schedule an inspection of your property." "Who filed this complaint?" "I can't disclose that information." "But we take all complaints seriously. When would you be available for an inspection?" We scheduled it for Friday morning. I immediately called Tom Bradford. "That's Patricia," Tom said without hesitation. "This is retaliation for Monday's meeting." "Can she do that? File false complaints?" "She can file complaints. Whether they're false remains to be seen. But Jake, if you're not actually violating any regulations, this is just harassment. Document everything, cooperate fully with the inspection, and we'll add it to our file." "Our file?" "Oh yes. If Patricia wants to play these games, we're going to be ready when it comes back to bite her." Thursday was quiet, almost suspiciously so. I worked in Whitefish, came home, and spent the evening making sure my property was in perfect order for the inspection. I'd always been careful about environmental issues. I had a proper containment area for any oil or fluids from equipment maintenance. I used licensed disposal services for anything hazardous, and I certainly didn't have any unpermitted wastewater discharge. Friday morning, Jennifer Hartley arrived with another inspector, a younger man named Chris. They were professional and thorough, spending 3 hours examining every inch of my property. They checked my equipment maintenance area, my fuel storage, my septic system, even took soil samples from various locations. "Mr. Morrison," Jennifer said as they were wrapping up, "I'll be honest with you. This property is cleaner and better maintained than 90% of the commercial operations we inspect. I see no violations here." So the complaint was bogus. She exchanged a glance with Chris. The complaint was very detailed and very specific. Whoever filed it claimed to have personal knowledge of violations, but nothing they described actually exists here. Makes me wonder if they even visited this property or if they just made it all up. If someone filed a false complaint, what happens to them? Technically, filing a knowingly false report with a state agency can be a misdemeanor, but proving someone knew it was false is difficult. Usually we just close the case and move on. She handed me a card. "You'll get a formal report in a few weeks, but unofficially you're clear. If you get any more harassment, give me a call." After they left, I sat on my porch with a beer, watching the sun move across the sky. Patricia was escalating, and I didn't like where this might be heading. I called Tom again. "We need to do something about this." "Agreed. Let me think about our options. In the meantime, keep documenting everything." The weekend passed without incident, but Monday brought a new problem. I came home from work to find a survey crew on my property, 3 people with equipment set up near the western boundary where the easement ran. "Excuse me," I called out, walking toward them. "This is private property. What are you doing here?" A young woman with a clipboard looked up. "Survey work for Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. We're verifying the easement boundaries. Do you have permission to be here?" We were told the HOA had access rights for the easement area. The easement gives them the right to cross the property, not to conduct surveys without permission. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The crew looked uncomfortable but started packing up their equipment. "We're just doing our job, sir." "I understand, but you need written permission for me to be here. If the HOA wants a survey done, they need to ask me first." After they left, I called Helen Cartwright. "Helen, I just kicked a survey crew off my property. What's going on?" She sighed heavily. "Jake, I'm sorry. Patricia convinced 2 other board members that we need to verify the exact boundaries of the easement. I wasn't in favor of it, but I was outvoted. Patricia doesn't have the authority anymore. She's still on the board and she's still pushing her agenda. We're trying to rein her in, but it's difficult. Helen, I'm trying to be patient here, but this is getting old fast. First the break-in, then the false environmental complaint, now trespassing surveyors. How much am I supposed to put up with? I know. Give me a few days." We're working on getting Patricia removed from the board entirely, but we have to follow proper procedures. Tuesday morning, I woke up to find all 4 of my truck tires slashed. Not just punctured, completely destroyed, with long cuts through the sidewalls. Diesel had barked sometime during the night, but I'd assumed it was just a deer or something. Now I stood in my driveway, staring at thousands of dollars in damage, and I was done being reasonable. I called the sheriff's office, and this time they sent 2 deputies, including Marcus. They took extensive photos, looked for footprints or other evidence, and checked the motion sensor lights I'd installed. One of the lights near the driveway had been spray-painted black. "This is targeted," Marcus said. "Someone came prepared, knew where your lights were, disabled them, and specifically went after your truck. Combined with the break-in last week, we're looking at a pattern of harassment. I think I know who's behind it. Patricia Whitmore. You heard about her, Marcus nodded. Small county, Jake. Word gets around. But thinking you know and proving it are two different things. Does she have an alibi? Did anyone see her here? Do we have any physical evidence? No, and probably not. Then all we can do is investigate and hope we get lucky. In the meantime, you need better security. Cameras, real ones that record, not just motion lights. I spent the rest of Tuesday dealing with the insurance company and getting my truck towed to a shop in Kalispell. The tire damage was extensive enough that they had to order new tires, which would take a few days. In the meantime, I borrowed my friend Dave's pickup to get to work. Wednesday afternoon, Tom called. I've been doing some digging into Patricia Whitmore. Turns out this isn't the first time she's had problems with neighbors. Oh, before she moved to Montana, she lived in a suburb of Phoenix. There was an incident there, a dispute with a neighbor over trees that were allegedly blocking her view. The trees mysteriously died, and the neighbor sued. It was settled out of court, but the police report is interesting reading. Patricia was suspected of poisoning the trees, but nothing was ever proven. So she has a history of this kind of thing. Appears so. I'm also looking into her background in general. She moved to Montana about 4 years ago, bought one of the more expensive houses in Meadowbrook, and immediately got involved with the HOA. Became president within 18 months. What does her husband do? I assume she's married. Divorced about 6 years ago. She got a substantial settlement, which is probably how she afforded the house. No employment history I can find for the past 5 years. She's basically a full-time HOA president. That painted a picture of someone with too much time and too much need for control. Dangerous combination. Thursday morning, I woke up to police lights in my driveway. I threw on clothes and ran outside to find Marcus and another deputy examining my excavator. Someone had poured sugar in the fuel tank, or at least attempted to. The locking fuel cap had protected it, but there was sugar spilled all over the equipment and the ground around it. I got a call about suspicious activity out here around 3 in the morning, Marcus explained. By the time we arrived, whoever it was had taken off, but we found this. He held up an evidence bag containing a Meadowbrook Estates HOA membership card. It was lying near your barn. Could have been dropped accidentally or could have been planted. Either way, we need to follow up on it. Whose card is it? Rather not say until we've interviewed the person. But Jake, you need cameras now, today. This is getting dangerous. After the deputies left, I called in sick to the Whitefish job and drove straight to Kalispell. I bought a complete security camera system, 6 cameras with night vision and cloud recording. I spent the entire day installing them around my property, covering every approach to my house, barn, and equipment yard. Friday afternoon, as I was testing the cameras, Helen Cartwright called. Jake, I need to tell you something, but I'm asking you to keep it confidential for now. Okay. We had an emergency board meeting this morning. We voted to remove Patricia from the board entirely. I thought you had to follow procedures. We do, and we did. We invoked a clause in our bylaws that allows immediate removal of a board member who engages in illegal activity or behavior harmful to the association. 2 other board members have been receiving harassing messages from Patricia, blaming them for siding with you. One found her car keyed. We decided enough was enough. How'd she take it? She left before we could officially inform her. Her ex-husband, actually called and told us Patricia has been served with a restraining order. Apparently she's been harassing him too, showing up at his house in Arizona, calling his girlfriend, all kinds of drama. This was bigger than I'd thought. Helen, I think Patricia might be the one vandalizing my property. I think you're right, and I think she's having some kind of breakdown. I tried to be sympathetic at first, but this has gone too far. The board is meeting with our attorney tomorrow to discuss liability issues and how to distance the HOA from her actions. That evening, my new cameras caught their first visitor. Around 8 o'clock, a car drove slowly past my property, a white Lexus that I recognized as Patricia's. It didn't stop, just cruised by slowly, but it was enough to set my teeth on edge. I called Marcus. Patricia Whitmore just drove past my property. The cameras caught it. That's not illegal, Jake. She can drive on a public road. I know. But combined with everything else, save the footage, it's part of the pattern we're building. But unless she actually does something, we can't arrest her for driving past. Saturday morning, I was up early to drive to Whitefish. I'd missed 2 days of work and needed to catch up. The project was time-sensitive, and my client was understanding but clearly anxious about the delays. I was about 2 hours into the work when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Jake Morrison? A man's voice, older with a slight southern accent. Yes. This is Frank Whitmore, Patricia's ex-husband. I got your number from Helen Cartwright. I hope you don't mind the call. Not at all. What can I do for you? I wanted to apologize for my ex-wife's behavior and give you a heads up. Patricia's not well. Hasn't been for a couple years now. She's been diagnosed with a personality disorder, refuses to take medication for it, and has been escalating in her behavior. The restraining order I filed is the third one. She violated the previous 2. I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Whitmore. Call me Frank. Look, I don't know if Patricia's behind the vandalism at your property, but it would fit her pattern. When she fixates on something or someone, she can't let it go. She becomes obsessive. I'm worried she's going to do something really stupid and end up in jail or worse. What do you suggest I do? Protect yourself. Cameras, security, whatever you need. And if you do catch her doing something illegal, don't hesitate to press charges. It might be the wake-up call she needs to finally get help. After the call, I sat in my truck for a few minutes, processing this new information. Patricia wasn't just difficult or power-hungry. She was genuinely unstable, and I was the current target of her obsession. That made the situation both more understandable and more dangerous. I finished the day's work and headed home, hyper-alert the entire drive. The sun was setting as I pulled into my driveway, painting the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Montana at sunset is about as beautiful as the world gets, and I tried to appreciate it despite the stress of the past few weeks. Diesel greeted me at the door, and I spent the evening reviewing the security camera footage from the day. Nothing unusual, just a few cars passing on the road, none of them Patricia's Lexus. Sunday was quiet. I caught up on household chores, did some maintenance on the equipment that hadn't been vandalized, and tried to relax. But there was a tension in the air, a feeling that something was building toward a breaking point. It came Monday night. I was asleep when Diesel's barking woke me. Not his usual alert bark, but aggressive, threatening barking. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera app, and my blood went cold. Patricia Whitmore was on my property, walking toward the barn with what looked like a gas can in one hand and something else in the other. The camera's night vision made everything green and ghostly, but there was no mistaking her. I called 911 while pulling on clothes. Someone's on my property with what appears to be gasoline. They may be trying to commit arson. The dispatcher kept me on the line while I described what I was seeing. On the camera feed, Patricia had reached the barn and was pouring gasoline along the base of the wall. She pulled out a lighter. She's about to light it, I told the dispatcher. Deputies are en route, 3 minutes out. Stay inside, sir. Do not confront her. But I couldn't just watch her burn down my barn. I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the kitchen and headed outside, Diesel right behind me. "Patricia, stop," I shouted. She spun around, lighter still in her hand. In the security light's glow, I could see her face was streaked with tears, her hair disheveled. "You ruined everything," she said, her voice shaking. "Everyone was happy before you caused all these problems." "I didn't cause any problems. I just wanted to be left alone." "Your trucks, your business, your grandfather's stupid easement. You're destroying the community we built." "Patricia, put down the lighter. You don't want to do this." "You don't know what I want. No one knows." She flicked the lighter and a small flame appeared. I heard sirens in the distance. "The police are almost here. Don't make this worse." "It can't get worse. They took away my position, my authority, everything I worked for." She moved the lighter toward the gasoline trail. Diesel growled, low and threatening, and Patricia's attention shifted to him for just a second. I didn't think, just reacted, pulling the pin on the fire extinguisher and spraying. The chemical foam hit Patricia square in the face, and she stumbled backward, dropping the lighter. It fell away from the gasoline, thank God, and went out. Moments later, police cars roared up the driveway, lights blazing. Marcus and 2 other deputies jumped out, weapons drawn. "Sheriff's Department, show me your hands." Patricia was on the ground, coughing and wiping foam from her face. I'd set down the fire extinguisher and had my hands up. "I'm the property owner. She tried to burn my barn." The deputies secured Patricia, who'd gone from aggressive to sobbing in a matter of seconds. Marcus checked on me while the other deputies checked the barn and photographed the gasoline trail. "You okay?" Marcus asked. "Yeah." "That fire extinguisher was the best $60 I ever spent. You probably saved your barn. Good thing you had those cameras." Patricia was arrested and charged with attempted arson, criminal trespassing, and a few other offenses I didn't quite catch. As they put her in the patrol car, she was crying and saying something about how unfair everything was. The next few hours were a blur of statements, more photos, evidence collection. The deputies took the gasoline can, the lighter that had fallen in the grass, and downloaded footage from all my security cameras. By the time they finished, it was nearly 4 in the morning. Marcus was the last to leave. "This'll go to the county attorney tomorrow, well, later today, I guess." With the video evidence and the physical evidence, it's a solid case. She'll probably be offered a plea deal, might include mandatory psychiatric evaluation. Think she'll take it? Hard to say. Depends on her mental state and whether her attorney can get through to her. "But Jake, you should probably get a restraining order too, just to be safe." I spent what remained of the night on the couch, too wired to sleep. Diesel stayed pressed against my legs, his own stress evident. We'd come very close to disaster. Tuesday morning, the story hit the local news. "Local woman arrested in attempted arson" was the headline on the Kalispell newspaper's website. They didn't mention the HOA connection, just the basic facts of the arrest. My phone blew up with calls. Helen Cartwright called to express shock and relief that I was okay. David Chen from the management company called to discuss liability issues and assure me the HOA would cooperate fully with the investigation. Tom Bradford called to say we should discuss our legal options regarding the HOA's responsibility for Patricia's actions. And Frank Whitmore called. "I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. I hope she wouldn't go this far." "Not your fault, Frank. You tried to warn me. Still, if you need anything, character testimony for the trial, whatever, I'm here. Patricia needs help, but she also needs consequences. Maybe this will finally be the thing that gets through to her." Wednesday, I met with Tom to discuss the situation. "Do you want to sue the HOA?" he asked bluntly. "Do I have grounds? Possibly." They knew Patricia was becoming unstable, they'd received complaints about her behavior, and they could argue they should have acted sooner to remove her. On the other hand, they did eventually remove her, and her actions were her own. It's not a clear-cut case. I don't want to bankrupt the HOA. Most of the people in Meadowbrook are decent folks who just wanted a nice place to live. Then, what do you want? I thought about it. I want assurance this won't happen again. I want the HOA to implement actual oversight of their board members. And honestly, I want to just move on with my life. Tom nodded. I can work with that. Let me draft a settlement proposal. They cover your damages from the vandalism, implement new governance procedures, and everyone moves forward. Thursday afternoon, I met with Helen and 2 other board members at Tom's office. We hammered out an agreement. The HOA would pay for repairs to my truck tires, cleaning the sugar spill from my excavator area, and general damages totaling about $8,000. They would also revise their bylaws to include more oversight of board members and a clear process for handling member complaints about board conduct. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue any further legal action against the HOA itself. Patricia was a different matter. The criminal case against her would proceed regardless. We really are sorry about all of this, Helen said as we were signing the paperwork. Patricia's actions don't represent our community. I know that, and I appreciate you all stepping up to fix the problem. Friday, my truck was ready, new tires installed and looking good as new. I drove to Whitefish and actually managed a full day of work without any drama or interruptions. It felt almost surreal. The weekend passed quietly. I caught up on work, spent time with Diesel, and tried to decompress from the past few weeks. The security cameras showed normal activity, a few cars passing, a deer wandering through early Saturday morning, nothing threatening. Monday morning, Marcus called. Thought you'd want to know. Patricia's attorney worked out a plea deal. She's pleading guilty to attempted arson and criminal mischief. She'll get probation, mandatory psychiatric treatment, and has to pay restitution to you. She's also agreed not to return to Flathead County for the duration of her probation. So she's leaving, moving back to Arizona apparently. Her ex-husband is even helping her, which is more than she deserves if you ask me. But the bottom line is, you won't have to worry about her anymore. That evening I sat on my porch watching the sunset again, beer in hand, Diesel at my feet. The mountains were doing their color shift thing, and the air had that crisp quality that Montana evenings get. For the first time in weeks, I felt relaxed. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen Cartwright. Just wanted you to know, the board voted unanimously to name our new community park after your grandfather. Will you come to the dedication ceremony next month? I smiled and texted back. I'd be honored. The next few weeks settled into a comfortable rhythm. I finished the Whitefish project, lined up 2 more jobs for the summer, and even started dating a woman I met at the hardware store in Kalispell. Life was good. The park dedication ceremony was held on a sunny Saturday in June. The whole neighborhood turned out, and I met dozens of residents who introduced themselves and thanked me for my patience during the Patricia situation. The park was nice playground equipment, picnic tables, a walking path, and the sign at the entrance read Morrison Community Park, established 2026, in honor of Thomas Morrison. Helen gave a short speech about my grandfather's generosity in granting the easement that made Meadowbrook Estates possible, and how that spirit of community cooperation was what they hoped to foster going forward. Several people applauded, and a few came up afterward to share stories about meeting my grandfather before he passed. He helped me when I first moved in, one elderly man said. My water line broke, and he came over with tools and helped me fix it, Wouldn't take a penny for his time. That sounds like Grandpa, I said, feeling a lump in my throat. David Chen pulled me aside near the end of the ceremony. Jake, on behalf of Prestige Property Management, I want to thank you for how you handled all of this. You had every right to be angry and vindictive, but you weren't. That says a lot about your character. I just wanted things to work out fairly for everyone. They did, and honestly, this whole situation led to some positive changes. We've implemented new training for HOA boards across all our properties, focusing on legal limits of authority and conflict resolution. So in a weird way, some good came out of this mess. As I drove home that evening, I thought about how the past few months had unfolded. It had started with a simple confrontation about my trucks and escalated to attempted arson, but in the end, justice had been served and relationships had been built. The easement that my grandfather granted 40 years ago still existed, still served its purpose, and now bore his name in the community it helped create. The following Monday, I got a letter from Patricia's attorney. It was brief and formal, but it included an apology from Patricia herself. The note was handwritten, shaky script on lined paper. "Mr. Morrison, I am writing to apologize for my actions. I have been receiving treatment and am beginning to understand how wrong I was. I let my need for control override my judgment and my humanity. You didn't deserve any of what I put you through. I am deeply sorry and hope that someday you can forgive me. Patricia Whitmore." I read it twice, then filed it away with all the other documents from the case. I didn't feel anger toward Patricia anymore, just a kind of sad understanding. She'd been struggling with something bigger than herself, and I'd been caught in the crossfire. Tom Bradford called that afternoon. "Saw you got Patricia's letter. What do you think?" "I think she's trying. That's more than I expected." "You're a good man, Jake. A lot of people would want blood after what she put you through." "What's the point? She's getting help, she's facing consequences, and I've got my life back. Holding a grudge won't make anything better. Spoken like your grandfather, he'd be proud." Summer rolled on, hot and bright and busy. I hired a part-time helper for the bigger jobs, a kid fresh out of trade school who was eager to learn. Business was booming, partly because word had gotten around about how I'd handled the HOA situation. Apparently people liked the idea of hiring a contractor who stood his ground but didn't burn bridges. In August, I got a call from Frank Whitmore. "Jake, I wanted to update you on Patricia. She's doing much better. The medication is helping and she's been attending therapy regularly. She's even volunteering at a community center, helping seniors with paperwork and applications. It's like she's finally found a healthy outlet for that need to help and organize." "That's great to hear, Frank. Really. She asked me to tell you she's working on a longer, more detailed apology. Not trying to excuse what she did, but to help you understand what was going on in her head. I told her you might not want to hear it, but she wanted to send it anyway if you're willing." "Sure, I'll read it." The letter arrived a week later. 5 pages of careful handwriting explaining Patricia's mental health struggles, her divorce, her feelings of losing control in her life, and how the HOA presidency had become her entire identity. She explained how my trucks had felt like a personal affront to the order she was trying to maintain, and how each setback had pushed her further into obsession. It was raw and honest and painful to read, but it helped me understand that Patricia's actions, while inexcusable, came from a place of genuine mental illness rather than simple malice. I wrote back, a short note thanking her for the honesty and wishing her well in her recovery. In September, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA held elections for their board. Helen Cartwright won the presidency by a landslide, and the new board immediately implemented the oversight procedures we'd agreed on. They also established a community liaison position specifically to handle relationships with adjacent properties, which basically meant keeping communication open with me. The liaison, a friendly woman named Carol who lived on the eastern edge of the development, stopped by one evening with a basket of cookies and a welcome packet. "We're trying to do better," she explained. "Part of that means making sure you feel like a valued neighbor, not an outsider or a threat." "I appreciate that, Carol, and I appreciate the cookies." My grandmother's recipe. There's also a newsletter in there with information about community events. You're welcome at any of them, the summer barbecue, the fall festival, all of it. We'd love to have you. I started attending the occasional HOA event, usually bringing something to share and spending time chatting with neighbors. It was odd at first, being welcomed into a community that had tried to ban me just months earlier, but people were genuine in their friendliness. The story of what happened with Patricia had become neighborhood lore, and I was generally viewed as the guy who'd been reasonable when he could have been vindictive. In October, I got an invitation to speak at a regional meeting of homeowners associations about property rights and easements. Apparently, the whole situation had caught the attention of HOA management professionals across Montana, and they wanted to use it as a case study in what not to do. I agreed, and spent an hour talking to about 50 HOA board members and managers about the importance of understanding property rights, the limits of HOA authority, and the value of communication and flexibility. I emphasized that most of the problems could have been avoided if Patricia had simply talked to me before trying to impose restrictions. HOAs serve an important function, I concluded. They help maintain property values and create pleasant communities. But they're not kingdoms, and board members aren't monarchs. When you remember that you're serving your neighbors, not ruling over them, everything works better. The presentation was well received, and I got thank you notes from several attendees. One manager wrote that he'd already implemented new training for his HOA boards based on my talk. By November, life had fully returned to normal. The attempted arson felt like ancient history, something that happened to a different version of me. I'd learned a lot about easements and property law, about HOAs and their complexities, about mental illness and forgiveness, and about standing your ground while still leaving room for reconciliation. Thanksgiving came, and Carol, the HOA liaison, invited me to a community potluck dinner. I brought my famous smoked brisket. Okay, it's my grandfather's famous recipe, but I'd mastered it, and spent the evening talking and laughing with neighbors who'd become friends. Helen Cartwright raised a glass during the informal toasts. "I want to thank Jake Morrison for his patience, his fairness, and his willingness to be part of this community despite everything that happened. We're better neighbors because of his example." People applauded, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment. But it was a good feeling, being appreciated and accepted. December brought snow and holiday preparations. The HOA put up tasteful decorations at the entrances to Meadowbrook Estates, and several neighbors hired me to do small projects, a new deck here, a garage expansion there. Working for my neighbors felt right, like we'd come full circle from those tense days when Patricia was blocking roads and filing false complaints. Christmas Eve, I was sitting by my fireplace, Diesel snoring at my feet when my phone rang. It was Frank Whitmore. "Jake, I'm calling with good news. Patricia's completed her probation requirements, finished her psychiatric treatment program, and is doing really well. Her doctor says she's made remarkable progress." "That's wonderful, Frank. She wanted me to ask if you'd be willing to talk to her, just for a few minutes. She's working on making amends to people she's hurt, and you're high on that list. But I told her I'd check with you first, make sure you're comfortable with it." I thought about it. Did I want to talk to Patricia? Part of me wanted to leave the past in the past. But another part, the part that believed in second chances and healing, thought it might bring closure for both of us. Yeah, I'll talk to her. Give her my number. Patricia called 2 days after Christmas. Her voice was tentative, humble in a way I'd never heard before. Mr. Morrison, thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I know you didn't have to. Call me Jake. And you're welcome. I've been working really hard on understanding what I did and why. I want you to know that none of it was your fault. You were just trying to live your life and run your business. I was the one with the problems, and I took them out on you. I appreciate you saying that, Patricia. I also want you to know that the consequences I faced, the arrest and the treatment and everything, were the best things that could have happened to me. I needed to hit bottom to realize I needed help. So, in a weird way, I'm grateful. We talked for about 20 minutes, and by the end, I found myself genuinely wishing her well. She'd done the work, faced her demons, and come out the other side. That took courage. New Year's Eve, the HOA threw a party in the community clubhouse. I almost didn't go, but Carol convinced me. It was a good night, full of laughter and conversation, and the sense that we'd all weathered a storm together and come out stronger. As midnight approached, Helen Cartwright clinked her glass for attention. I want to make a toast. To neighbors, to second chances, to doing the right thing even when it's hard. And to Jake Morrison, who reminded us all what being a good neighbor really means. To Jake, everyone chorused, raising their glasses. I raised mine in return, looking around at the faces of people who'd become friends. The past year had been difficult, challenging, and at times downright scary. But standing there in that warm room, surrounded by community, I realized something important. The easement my grandfather granted wasn't just about property access. It was about connection, about people coming together despite obstacles, about making space for others even when it costs you something. That easement had given them access to the highway. But handling the crisis around it had given us all something more valuable. A real community, built not on rules and restrictions, but on respect and understanding. As I drove home that night, snow falling gently in my headlights, I thought about what the past year had taught me. I'd learned that standing your ground doesn't mean refusing to bend. I'd learned that justice and mercy can coexist. I'd learned that communities are built not by people who never make mistakes, but by people who work to fix them. And I'd learned that sometimes the best inheritance isn't land or money, but the example of how to treat others. My grandfather had shown kindness to developers who needed an easement. When that kindness was taken for granted, I'd stood up for my rights. But I'd also left room for reconciliation, for healing, for moving forward together. The case of the HOA trying to ban my trucks from the road had ended with them learning their only exit crossed my easement. But more importantly, it had ended with all of us learning how to be better neighbors. January brought new projects and new challenges, but I faced them with confidence. My business was thriving, my relationships with my neighbors were strong, and I had the satisfaction of knowing I'd handled a difficult situation with integrity. The easement remained in place, properly documented and protected. The roads through Meadowbrook Estates stayed open, serving their purpose of connecting the community to the wider world. And I continued to drive my trucks through whenever I needed to, no longer in defiance but in the simple exercise of my legal rights. Sometimes, I'd see new residents looking at my trucks with confusion, wondering why commercial vehicles were allowed when the HOA rules said they weren't. Invariably, an older resident would explain, "That's Jake Morrison's property. He's the reason we have our western entrance. His grandfather granted us the easement, and Jake could have taken it away when we were stupid, but he didn't." He's a good neighbor. And that, I realized, was the best reputation a man could have. The story of the HOA trying to ban my trucks had a happy ending. Not because I'd won some crushing legal victory, or because Patricia had been punished severely, but because everyone involved had grown from the experience. The HOA had learned to respect property rights and individual liberties. Patricia had gotten the help she needed and was building a better life. And I'd learned that sometimes the hardest conflicts can lead to the strongest communities. My grandfather used to say that being a good neighbor sometimes meant standing firm and sometimes meant bending. The trick was knowing which was which. As I looked back on everything that had happened, I thought I'd finally figured out what he meant. You stand firm on principles, on rights, on fairness, on what's truly important. But you bend on pride, on the need to be right, on holding grudges that serve no purpose. You defend your property and your livelihood, but you don't let conflicts define you. You seek justice, but you leave room for mercy. The easement across my property would stand for as long as Meadowbrook Estates existed, a physical reminder of my grandfather's generosity and my own commitment to being a good neighbor. But more than that, it stood as a symbol of what communities can be when people choose connection over conflict, understanding over anger, and growth over grudges. The trucks still rolled through Meadowbrook Estates, carrying equipment and materials for whatever project I was working on. But now they also carried something else. The knowledge that respect and rights, properly balanced, can create something better than either side fighting to the bitter end. In the end, the HOA had tried to ban my trucks from the road. They'd learned their only exit crossed my easement. But what we'd all learned, through conflict and crisis and eventual resolution, was something far more valuable. How to build a community that worked for everyone, one easement, one conversation, one act of good faith at a time.